Um, as you can see, we have Lloyd I always say it wrong, De Jong. Was that
De
right this time?
Jong, De Jong.
De Jong. Um, we are looking at the topic of Muslim funding of Western universities today. It's a topic you have done before, Lloyd, I believe.
Yeah, I did a very detailed study of the finances, taking U.S. government and U.S. Department of Education and University reported funding, and shown how many billions of dollars communist countries as well as Muslim countries are pushing into universities to basically co-opt them.
Yeah. So we're going to be. I just heard, I could hear myself back. I would just have to switch off my phone there just in case. Um,
Yeah,
so
no, the
we're
audio
going
is
to be
coming through.
looking. Ah, okay, that's great. I'm going to be looking at the various ways that criticism has been uh, attempted to be closed down. So obviously, money is a big part of it. Um, the area that I'm going to start with is the term Islamophobia, which was coined over 100 years ago, and that really is the start of it. That had a very chilling effect on the academic community. Have I lost you there, Lloyd?
No, I'm here.
Your
I see
your
you.
camera's
Everything seems fine.
frozen. I think maybe the
It seems
stream
like it's
is.
on your end, Mal. You're freezing now.
Oh, it's just my internet. My internet. Yeah, my internet is really awful. It's been. I, let's just start into this without further ado. Let me see. Hopefully this works okay. And it's going to be playing games with me, I think, today. All right. So to start with, I'm going to be looking at how the term Islamophobia got introduced to scare off scholars. I think that's the main purpose of it. So Alan Quillian first coined the term Islamophobia in his 1910 PhD thesis. He was a French colonial bureaucrat. I found that really odd. Of all the people that might have coined the term, I didn't expect a French person to coin the term, and
So
it kind of,
Mal, you may
yeah,
want to do. I've got a paper that I have mentioned it publicly, but never done any detailed work in it. It mentions Western conversions to Islam in the 17 and
yeah,
1800s, and you'd be amazed how many Westerners, and many did not change their names, but they
yeah,
converted to Islam. So there may well be lots of sympathies, especially amongst French philosophers. You'd be
yeah,
very surprised.
yeah. Could
So
be that
you never
indeed.
know.
Yeah. I was looking into that now. I happened to read a few pages of AJ Juice's book, which name is escapes me, which is on Luther. But he mentioned about the alliance between the French and the Ottomans, and that kind of made me think, well, okay, that makes sense now that he might be trying to play down the negatives of Islam because obviously France would look bad if they're in alliance with all of that. So here's his quotation in justification for his term. For some, the Muslim is the natural and irreconcilable enemy of the Christian and the European. Islam is the negation of civilization and barbarism. Bad faith and cruelty are the best one can expect from the Mohammedans. Now, the bit that I thought was kind of sneaky of him was the fact that he's he's straw manning people's people who disagree with him by saying that their position is that um, barbarism is the best you can expect from Mohammedans, whereas in fact most people would say, well, we're not saying that that's the best, but there are aspects in the history which are not good, regardless of how you might feel, you know, in your general sympathies. Any thoughts on that yourself?
It could well be projection because in Islam, if you look at their Aqidah, they are required legally and religiously to hate non-Muslims. So he
Yeah,
could then be. So this is like pre-bunking. So you are
yeah,
trying to accuse the others of what you are guilty of. So I mean, we'd have to. We can't confirm that he's Muslim, but there's certainly a sympathy here.
yeah. Um, Now, I thought it was a bit rich to say the least for this Frenchman to complain of Islamophobia when France had not had the Ottomans on their doorstep, you know. France didn't have that worry. At Europe's greatest peril, France sided with the Ottomans, while the cries of fellow Christian countries in Eastern Europe had gone unheard, suffering at the hands of the Ottomans. So that's my take on it. It seemed that it's all well and fine to say, oh, we're wrong to complain about the the bad side of Islam, whereas France hadn't really suffered, at least not in centuries. If you go back to the 730s, of course, that was a different story, but that was at that stage long forgotten. Now, just to kind of follow up on that there, unfortunately, part of my screen is hidden here. So there was an alliance between Francis I of France and Suleiman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire as a counterbalance to the Habsburgs. This was just 7 years after the first siege of Vienna, when just 21,000 soldiers fought back 100,000 Ottomans. That's how close it all came, at that time. The French were still in alliance with the Ottomans when the Ottomans again attempted a second siege of Vienna in 1683 with up to 300,000 soldiers. The West was defended by the Holy Roman Empire, led by the Habsburg monarchy and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, both under the command of King John III. Louis XIV of France declined to offer any help. Now, in both those instances, had Vienna fallen, basically Europe would now be an entirely Muslim continent by more than likely, because of the onslaught would not have been stopped. That was literally our last.
The stated intention was because Vienna was the capital, effectively, of Christian Rome, or at least Western Rome. Vienna was effectively the capital of Europe at that time, of the Habsburg Empire. They said that once they took Vienna, they were then going to take their army straight to Rome, and they were going to stable their horses in the cathedrals of St. John and St. Peter. So that was the intention. So they had to be stopped.
Yeah. So it's quite hard to believe that at the moment of greatest peril for Europe, that the French leaders were so short-sighted that they were more concerned with their petty rivalries with the Habsburgs, not seeing the bigger picture, that actually they could have lost their entire power. So it's kind of.
It could be that they had there was the whole rivalry with the Catholics, and they could have well thought, if they're sort of leaning Protestant, destroy the Catholics and then have an alliance with the Muslims.
Yeah, it could have been that indeed. But in any case, I think this might be some part of the reason for his apologetic, as it were, towards Islam, by calling those opposed to Islam as Islamophobic. So I think that's your term, nothing to see here, folks. It must be noted that the whole time that France was content to be in alliance with the Ottomans were enslaving Anatolian and Balkan Christian boys to become janissaries, literally door servants. This system was called, I think you pronounce it, devshirme. This term here, I think you pronounce it devshirme. Literally means collecting, usually translated as child levy or blood tax. Was the Ottoman practice of forcibly recruiting soldiers and bureaucrats from among the children of their Balkan Christian subjects and forcibly converting them to Islam. Some of these children were castrated to become eunuchs. They stopped enslaving them in 1648. Despite this brutal history, France in 1683 refused to help the Viennese against the Ottomans. So I think there's a large part of the reason why maybe in 1910 the French probably needed, at least some of the French were in denial about the negative side of their alliance with the Ottomans, and I think this kind of maybe served their case. Now, that's not to say this is representative of all the French, because I'm sure there were a lot of French that were increasingly critical of the influence of Islam. Now, I see there are a number of people in the house from Eastern Europe. Um, so, if you want to share in the comments your own knowledge of that history, please share some examples. That would be great. It's definitely closer to home for you. During the summer, I should say, just while we're on this, I had a cycle from Istanbul all the way to Vienna. I didn't quite do the first part. It was a little bit difficult to get roads through Turkey to Bulgaria, but um, I found it incredible that I could still see the impact of the Ottomans even now on some of the countries, and it just waned as you got to Slovakia. That's how far the extent of the influence, and how you can still see today is in the type of singing that you hear in the countries. It still has that flavor of the kind of the lilting of the voice, which is very Ottoman like. I don't know what people out there think of that, but it just struck me that there's still that cultural influence. Any thoughts there on that?
Probably true. I mean, you start in the Balkans and you work your way north.
Yeah.
You will see that influence. And in fact, even I remember I knew someone when I was in Dubai. She was from Bulgaria, and she was Christian, but her surname was Haji Todorova. So
Yeah.
I mean, the term Haji. So there's that influence that remains within the culture.
Yeah.
Even within Poland, I mean, the Turks were actually the Muslims were invading France in the late 600s already.
Yeah.
Now I'm pretty sure the French had not invaded the Middle East or Saudi Arabia in the 680s and 690s.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even in Poland, they invaded into Poland. They had to be kicked out of Poland in the 15 and 1600s. So
Yeah.
there's even influences here where you can see certain words or names seem to have a holdover from Islam.
Yeah. Actually, I'm very conscious of Ukraine at the moment for obvious reasons, and I've noticed that quite a few of the names, like for example, I think Bakhmut is one of the places. A few others that have a Turkish influence. Some of the place names are of Turkish origin, so there's a lot of that. I'm not sure if Bakhmut is one example, but there are a few that I've noticed. So to carry on, of course, a phobia is an anxiety disorder, and if parents had been worried of having their children taken away to be castrated, forcibly converted, and forcibly made a slave soldier, then clearly they had an anxiety disorder. I'm being sarcastic here about it. But Alan could dismiss all that history with a neologism, Islamophobia. So I kind of think he doesn't really take that history seriously. He's basically saying, "Oh, if you remember that history, you're being a bigot," essentially, and that's very unfair. I think that history needed to be aired and not just hidden. And actually, a lot of Western countries, there's a definite divide between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. A lot of people in Western Europe are not that familiar with what went on during those centuries. Um, so, um, so now I'm going to kind of get into the academic side of things. This is kind of really just an intro. The cooling effect of the term Islamophobia, or the chilling effect, perhaps. It was a bit rich for Alan Quillian to concoct this term, and it reflects a nonchalant attitude to the threat of Islamic conquest. But the word seems to have had a cooling effect on the historical critique of Islam right up to the 1970s. Prior to 1910, a lot of work had been done in this field. Goldziher, 1850 to 1921. In 1890, published, and I'm going to try my best on this, Mohammedanische Studien, in which he showed how Hadith reflected the legal and doctrinal controversies of the 2 centuries after the death of Muhammad rather than the words of Muhammad himself. That was a great step forward in the critique of the traditions. Henri Laman said that the great majority of traditions from the Prophet are documents not of the time to which they claim to belong, but of the successive stages of development of doctrines during the first centuries of Islam. I think that would be something you would concur based on your own study of Sharia.
Yeah, the Sharia developed over 900 years. So yes, but also the term Islamophobia, it's interesting in that it also complies with the Sharia in that it is not allowed to criticize Islam. So Muslims will counter that by saying, oh, we ask questions because when you say you're not allowed to question Islam, we mean you're not allowed to critically question Islam, whereas Muslims will say, but we ask questions in the mosque all the time. It's not that kind of question.
No,
So
no.
it is not allowed to, and one must take action, and there's an escalating scale in terms of response. And the first level of response is kind words, but it's optional. But before using violence, it's recommended, not compulsory, that you use harsh language. You find clever retorts. So
Yeah.
this conforms with the Sharia with silencing any criticism of Islam because Islam is perfect.
Yeah, so that like what you said, there were many Westerners that converted Islam. Don't know much about the scholar Alan Quillian, so perhaps he certainly had sympathies towards Islam. Was he a Muslim? Possibly. We'll have to check that one out. Theodore Noldeki, 1836 to 1930, questioned the chronology of the Quran surahs, among other topics. He critically examined the style and syntax of the Quran and found it greatly deficient in its mode of expression. That memo doesn't seem to have got down to the grassroots Muslims who still claim its absolute perfection. It was not until John Wansborough in the 1970s that serious work into the historical critique was resumed. So you can see there was a 60-year gap where basically historical criticism just seemed to die off, became very anodyne, and then John Wansborough really kind of kicked it into gear again, and then obviously people like Patricia Crona and others uh, carried on the work, and it's gaining traction, but it's an uphill battle because of the control on the universities, as we'll soon see. I don't know how well this is going to work because my internet connection isn't too great, but I'd like to show a couple of clips here. I just see. I don't know if this is going to work. It may not. No, I don't think I can do this. Um, Essentially, one of the video clips I may just share the links afterwards. But one of the clips is about the university lecturer in America that got dismissed for having images of Muhammad during her Islamic art lectures, despite the fact that that is actually not that controversial. These are pieces of work that are well known to Muslims for centuries. And then the other clip that I was going to show you is the one that I shared just a few days ago. It was an interview with Ibn Waraq where he openly admits that um, that academics are being influenced by in what he mentioned Saudi money, and that if they say anything too controversial or write anything too controversial, the universities could lose their funding, and so therefore, lecturers can be dismissed from their position, and they're afraid essentially to say anything controversial, and this is in the context of the idea of people talk about historical consensus about the story of Islam. Well, how can you talk about a consensus where academics are being curtailed in what they can write about and what they can say because most of the money is coming from Islamic sources? So, any thoughts on that before going to any further?
Look at Samuel Paty in France recently. He showed a Muhammad cartoon and had his head removed from his body by a devout student from the religion of peace.
Yeah,
Then you can think of there's for instance, the Draw Muhammad contest, which was nearly attacked by two jihadis, and
yeah,
the FBI somehow allowed that to go ahead, and they were only stopped by private security.
yeah,
And we can mention others. Like I have some examples as part of
yeah.
my presentation,
Okay.
but they've been dumping billions over the years into the major Western universities, and they are reaping the benefit because they're not dumping in hundreds of millions of dollars from Saudi and hundreds of millions from Qatar for no reason.
There's always a return on investment, as it were.
Yep, correct.
So let's kind of get some more information here. So foreign Muslim funding of Western universities, according to a report by Professor Anthony Lees, director of Brunel University's Centre for Intelligence and Security Studies, 8 universities in the UK, including Oxford and Cambridge, have accepted more than £233.5 million from Saudi and Muslim sources since 1995, with much of the money going to Islamic study centres. That's quite a lot of money. Now, if you look at the sections in red there, a closed meeting called by the Higher Education Funding Council for England about Islamic studies will take place today amid fears that Saudi and Muslim organisations exert too much influence over UK universities as a result of donations that dwarf government funding. Notice that the funding from Islamic sources is greater than government funding. That's obviously a big concern. This is from The Guardian, 2008. It also says that private donations, mostly to Islamic study centres, are much greater than government funding for Islamic studies, and academics are said to be nervous of the threat to their academic freedom. And that's a kind of key term that we're going to hear quite a bit. Dr. Dennis McKeown, Islam expert at Newcastle University, said that academics were nervous about handling topics that might upset their sponsors. And then there's a quote here: "It does not threaten can't unfortunately read it because it's hidden." Let me just see if I can. No, fortunately, I cannot see. Oh, here, that's better. It does not threaten academic freedom and critical thinking. Sorry, it does threaten academic freedom and critical thinking, he warned. Now, you may be familiar with this academic, Sean Anthony. I consider someone who takes a very velvet glove approach to Islam and Islamic history. He wrote a book called Muhammad and the Empires of Faith, the Making of the Prophet of Islam. And I just draw your attention to this bit here. But whereas Krona's skepticism took aim at the tendency of some scholars to accept at face value the details of the Sirah, the body of early Arabic biographical accounts of the Prophet, Anthony seeks to counter the pessimism of historians who have gone too far in the opposite direction in underestimating its historical value. So to translate that, he's basically saying that scholars have been too critical of the Sirah and the Hadiths, and that there is historical value in them. So this is part of the reason why the Saudis are putting money into the universities, because this is the sort of academic they want, someone who gives credibility to their sources and their standard Islamic narrative. Feel free to jump in on any of that.
Oh, no, not yet.
No, not just okay. Okay, so the Middle East Forum, just give you some other details here. Oxford's Middle East Centre has received substantial sums of money from sources in the Middle East. There's a clear risk that donors will seek to influence the output and activities of the MEC. If not curtailed, this risk could usher in the abandonment of the very intellectual freedoms on which our wider freedoms rest. It is our complicity in the rapid and so far unstoppable growth of direct Islamic and indeed Islamist control over whole departments and centres in a burgeoning number of Western universities in
burgeoning,
Europe.
Growing.
Number of Western universities in Europe and the USA. Let me see. The universities involved are among the top academies in the world. The money involved is hundreds of billions of dollars, and the targets of Islamic finance are, for the most part, specific and form part of a distinct agenda. Some money may be given to business schools or science departments, but the overwhelming majority goes to support or create large departments and academic centers for Middle East, Islamic, or Arabic studies. And obviously, an awful lot of the focus is in encouraging dawah and giving all the finances that to promote that on the university campus and so forth. Um, um, just going into down there in the yellow. Well, if they observed complete neutrality and left academics to their own counsel, their input would pass as simple generosity or as contribution to good relations within the international community. What could be nicer? So the comment here is essentially, yeah, it would be all nice if that was it. There was no strings attached, but unfortunately, as we'll see, there are strings attached, and it does have put pressure on the universities. Even fairly rich universities such as Harvard and Oxford experience financial difficulties. State funds are often hard or impossible to obtain. Academics have to scramble to find funding for their projects, their jobs, or their departments. So you can imagine if a scholar wants to do a particular bit of research into the Sirah or the Hadiths, they can't get normal funding. So the only people that will give them the funding are these Muslim sources, and obviously they don't want anything too critical about their sources. So they basically produce something that's anodyne and ambiguous and not too controversial as a result.
Usually positive.
Usually positive, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Over the past decade, Saudi Arabia has been the largest source of donations from Islamic states and royal families to British universities, much of which is devoted to the study of Islam, the Middle East, and Arabic literature. A large share of this money went toward establishing Islamic study centers. In 2008, Prince Al Walid bin Talal donated £8 million each to Cambridge and Edinburgh for this purpose. Al Chishadia Business Daily reported yesterday. Oxford has been the largest British beneficiary of Saudi support. Let's just take a few more examples here. $250,000 came from the United Arab Emirates for a visiting professorship of Arab history. This was for Georgetown, and there's various other sums there mentioned. Leading the list of beneficiaries is Harvard with about $30 million. Okay, so you can see this big money being given to the universities. Oxford has a research centre funded by the Iranian regime, while at Cambridge the funds come from Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Iran. Scholarships and degree programs are the favourite and easiest weapons of the Islamist regimes to influence the Western academies and their freedoms. 8 universities, including Oxford and Cambridge, have accepted more than £233.5 million from Saudi and Muslim sources since 1995. I think that was a figure I mentioned earlier. Also here, many large donations to the MEC have been anonymous, creating a lack of transparency. In many cases, Oxford has knowingly accepted money from undemocratic states with poor human rights records. Several agreements made between the MEC and donors appear to indicate that funders have sought to influence the centre's output and activities. So, as you can see, there are strings attached. It isn't just free money. Cambridge University is an example of how funding has had a significant impact upon how the university is run. Recent donations have been attached with conditions that could lead to donors gaining oversight via university management committees. While the principal donor's intentions seem honourable, a precedent appears to have been set where wealthy donors can influence the running of an independent academic institution. All that, let me see. So basically, their universities are given money, and all that is good, provided academies steer clear of controversy and subjects that upset their donors. In truth, academic freedom is at risk. Okay. And then here it refers to the idea that strings are attached. What so many fail or prefer not to grasp is that the subventions from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, in particular, are part of a much wider pattern. The Saudis, for decades, have dispersed hundreds of billions of dollars in order to propagate their Puritan form of Islam, Wahhabism, across the globe, while building hundreds of mosques, schools, libraries, and Islamic centers, and sending out streams of hardline preachers trained in their seminaries and Islamic universities to spread their message to Muslims everywhere, creating and financing bodies for Islamic missionary work, recruiting young Muslims to commit to an extreme form of their faith, all to the end of making the Saudi state the key player in the world of Islam and a leader in the propagation of Islam in the West. That is the nature of the doctrine. Deep pockets for academic study in Europe and North America are stitched tightly against their pockets that fund the missionary work and the enforcement of the most fundamentalist form of Islamic faith. So I hope that's kind of clear to everyone that the context of this funding is a Wahhabist vision for the West. They want to propagate Dawah and their version of Dawah into the West. And good luck if you want to do historical criticism in this context, in other words. The moment Western scholarship infringes the sensitivities of the Saudis, Qataris, Kuwaitis, Bahrains, and others, the barriers go up. Academics are denied visas to attend conferences, criticism of Gulf states is toned down, debate is shifted away from the Gulf monarchies themselves and compared to study of other Arab regions. Rigorous critiques on subjects in the Gulf, such as political reform, human rights, and suppression of dissent, are largely excluded. According to Christian Coates Ulrichsen of Rice University's Baker Institute, almost every centre of Middle East studies in the UK is linked somehow to a Gulf backer. It's created dilemmas, especially over the last few years, as the threshold of self-tolerance of any dissenting view has got lower.
Yeah, and that's why Villainous said, hence the work of enthusiastic amateurs is so important. And that would be you and me.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I've said this openly, that professional scholars have been negligent or complicit.
Yeah, and it's hard to blame them because literally their bread and butter depends on keeping quiet. And you know,
if the Saudis were sending me $1 million a year, I mean, hey, maybe I'd be a little compliant too. But, you guys listening,
yeah.
But I'm not getting those first-class flights to conferences in London and Paris and
Yeah.
Rome, and that's so. Yeah, but and I mean, academia has been negligent in dealing with the facts. And the weird thing is, you go back to the 1700s, 1800s, you read especially English and German scholarship on Islam. It was scathing. I mean, it was highly critical. And then you get to World War I, World War II, and poof, it just evaporates. And then after oil is discovered in the 50s in Saudi, everything just turns around and suddenly silence.
Yeah. Now, there's an example here. For the clearest evidence that Gulf backers cannot be entrusted with the support of Western university studies of Islam in the Middle East, we need not look further than one of the earliest cases of Saudi investment in the field. In 1981, the Saudi Ministry of Higher Education paid for a lectureship at Britain's Newcastle University to teach Arabic and Islamic studies in the Department of Religious Studies. The appointee, a non-Muslim British teacher with a solid research record, embarked on an ambitious range of topics designed to give students a wide background in Islamic history and doctrine. 5 years later, funding for his post was abruptly ended. The reason was that he included among his courses lectures on Sufism and Shiaism, vital subject for any study of Islam, yet to the Wahhabis both anathema.
I don't know that Sufism is something that's anathema. I think it's something they don't want examined publicly.
Thank you, Erkin, for the super chat. No one else is funding us here. We're not getting any funding from the Middle East, so thank you. so what happened then? This was bad enough. Academics at neighboring Durham University's Center for Middle East and Islamic Studies were vociferous in condemning the action and the reason given for it, but the Saudis went further. They appointed unilaterally, without any involvement with an interview by university board, a Saudi teacher with no qualifications whatsoever in Islamic studies. His PhD was in English literature. The department and the university, eager to receive more money, allowed this amateur to teach and examine their students for several years more, after which the post fell by the wayside. So this is sort of a very strong example of what can happen. This is one of the most remarkable academic stories of recent history. A dismissal and an appointment based solely upon religious doctrine, but it had its effect. Other academics in the field receiving or hoping to receive Saudi funding now had their eyes open. There are topics, however, important within the subject that anyone who wants to keep his job must steer clear of. Now, I am aware of another example of an academic who I can't mention, but who was kicked out of the university for this very thing. And I tried my best to get a placement for him with
Don't
my
forget,
contact.
I started my channel because at university, when I was doing counterterrorism, I got banned from making any comments because I was posting ISIS documents and quoting from the Sharia, and the university took steps to silence me.
Wow.
So because there's certain topics, certain places they don't want to go.
Yeah.
And the dean of the faculty of counterterrorism did not want any discussion whatsoever of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
At least, unless it's in the most glowing of terms.
Wow.
So ask yourself.
Yeah. So in the light of all of this, those who apply the historical criticism, I can't read it. Can you read that?
Which line is it on?
Just the title.
Oh, so in the light of all this, those who apply the historic critique to Islam are swimming against the tide.
Right, yeah. It is far easier for one's academic career to toe the party line, especially not to question the standard Islamic narrative. Many scholars who do Islamic studies are simply not doing any historical critique. Here, the term revisionism is misleading. It's a term I really object to. What needs to be done is to establish what is historically accurate. Calling it revisionism is an inaccurate caricature. Now, there are some people who will create a fabricated sort of notion of history. That's revisionism. But if you're trying to fact check everything and you're trying to establish, did something happen? If you are trying to use coins as evidence, if you're trying to use early documents as evidence, that is not revisionism. That's trying to get back to what actually did happen, rather than just assuming what someone wrote a few centuries after the fact is the real history. So that's my side of things. Lloyd, I'm going to hand it over to yourself there.
Okay, I just started sharing my screen.
Yeah.
So I'll bring up some information from my side to corroborate yours. So
Yeah.
the audience knows me well. I have a series on my channel. If you go to my channel, go to the search function, look for the word lobby. I have 3 talks called The Power of the Islamic Political Lobby. This is a repeat and with updated numbers. I did it 1 year ago. Oddly enough, they didn't get a whole lot of views, but they got a lot of views previously, and they caused quite a firestorm on another channel. And there were always these claims that, oh, the Jews own the universities. The Jews put so much money in that own the universities. The Jews' money is dwarfed, absolutely dwarfed. It's like your kid's pocket money versus your salary, right?
Yeah.
The pocket money you give your 5-year-old versus your salary. That's the difference here. So I've got the power part 1, 2, and 3. You might find this interesting. I go through in great detail the financial amount taken from government documents from the actual universities' financial departments, which they have to declare every 2 years or something. They've got to make a financial declaration.
Yeah.
However, and also from US government spreadsheets on the subject from the US Department of Education. However, these numbers are probably only, according to even FBI estimates, half of what the government, it runs into the billions, but it's about half probably because there are ways and means to make the money disappear. There's ways and means to divide the money up so that it doesn't have to be shown publicly. So have a look at my channel, search, go to the search function, go to lobby, the power of the Islamic political lobby, 3 parts, and I go into detail on the financial amounts. I show the amounts. I'm going to do a little bit of that. I'll also come to this in a moment. I wanted to mention this article here. This one is called A History of Conversion to Islam in the United States, Volume 1, White American Muslims Before 1975. This is a very interesting read. Some odd names crop up here with some very interesting connections going all the way back to things like the French Revolution and stuff. You start to find names and you're like, what, that guy was a Muslim? So the problem is you start to do this in France and you start to do this in Britain and you start to realize there was a lot of Muslims that haven't changed names and these people were in positions of influence.
Yeah.
So
it was definitely in their interest. It was definitely in their interest to keep their original names so they could have more clout.
Yeah, especially within the French philosophies, those insane French philosophers, you want to look into that. Okay, yeah, sorry, maybe I want to move this away. So I want to bring up my slides. Give me one moment.
Sure, no problem.
Oops, here. Okay, so let me show this. Okay, it should be showing now. So this is Wahhabi. It's only like 6 or 7 slides I'm going to do. Wahhabi indoctrination in US education. Let me just move this over. Right. So Wahhabi indoctrination in US education. So this was a New York Times Magazine article, and these are very leftist. But why is there so much Saudi money in American universities? Saudi Arabia has quietly directed tens of millions of dollars a year to American universities from MIT to Northern Kentucky. What are the nation's rulers getting out of it? And that's a very, very fair question. Right? And then also, our schools get Judas cash. Right? So that's a very interesting comment that people are very concerned about this. Right? For betrayal. There's a concern about betrayal. But of course, there's also an anti-Semitic slant potentially that people are claiming it's the Jews doing it. We have a look at the Saudis, right? So let's look at University Dawah. Let's follow the money. This is from the College Foreign Gift Reporting paper, right? From ed.gov, sites.ed.gov/foreign gifts. You can download the spreadsheets from the US government website yourself. So let's have a look here. It's been a while since I've looked through this. Even Afghanistan sent like $9 million in 15 donations to the universities. Okay, Bahrain sent. Yeah,
I'm sure they have plenty of things that they could invest in their own country rather than sending it to universities in America.
Yes, I know, it's crazy. Bangladesh sent like $8 million. The Cayman Islands. Now, what is fascinating is the Cayman Islands sends a huge amount of money. This is just the university spend that we have.
Yeah.
But overall, in terms of political lobbying, the Cayman Islands sends a fortune because the Cayman Islands is where most of these dictators and these countries put their offshore cash because it's effectively untraceable money. Yeah. China sent $680,273,016, right? Yeah. So that is a lot of money. I think this goes back to about 2020 or something. Egypt, 6 million. Ethiopia, 1 million. Okay, then 43 million for Indonesia. Iran sent $80. They traced $80. That is absolutely not true. Iran has sent millions, but somehow only $80 turns up. And I said the FBI, from their figures, this is probably double what the actual figures are. Iraq, $44 million. Jordan. Now, you must understand the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference, they operate as a unit. They're a pact. They're a bloc. So they're not one country. Now, there is competition between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And Qatar is aligned very much with Iran at the moment. But they work as a unit. They work as a bloc. So you must understand there's 50 countries in that bloc. And when you combine all of this money, it is an absolute fortune. So if you look at Kazakhstan and Kuwait, 62 million, 66 million, right? Now, when you put the totals together, that's over $2 billion just for these, up to these two guys, right? Once you add all their funding money together, which is 38 times more than Israel puts in. Israel is one country. There are more billionaires and millionaires in the Islamic countries than is in Israel. And they float on oil. Israel does not. Then you start to add again, Qatar and Saudi Arabia, 1.253 billion and 649 million. All right. Now you're up to nearly 2 billion, and that's 35.4 times. Now look at this number, it's 38 times more than Israel. This number is 35 times more than Israel. And the top five put in 2.261 billion, which is 42.08 times more than Israel puts into universities. And when you look at where the money goes, so in other words, these two countries alone, Kazakhstan and Kuwait, put in 38 times more money into universities than does Israel. So these are the numbers. Unless someone can tell me I'm lying, because people will anyway, but bring me the numbers, right? This is almost $4 billion. Now, this is probably only half of the actual figure. 1,848 Islamic donations, which is 69.7 times more than Israel spent in biotech. Because where does Israel fund universities? We know exactly where, because the money is traced. It's in biotech. Okay. In other words, hydration. How do I make this desert into arable land? Farming. Israel puts money into farming and biotech. Right?
Yeah.
Whereas the Saudis are doing dawah. They want to print. The Saudis are literally putting money into textbooks that go to kindergarten, universities, and schools, into religious education. Yes, sir.
It's only through the grace of God.
Oh, Mal, you're actually blocking you're actually blocking the. You might want to put us on the side again. I realize you're actually blocking my.
Is that any better?
No. Small, Mel.
You see, I'll just go through the options.
Like you had it before with us on the side, tiny. There you go. That's the one. That's the one. Yeah. So, including communist China, you've got over $3 billion, $3.2 billion. You've got nearly $4 billion in total, and it's 70 times more than Israel spends on biotech. So these guys are putting money into religious education and dawah, and also political lobbying. They're putting money into political science faculties and religious faculties. Israel is doing technology, biotechnology related to farming. It's a very different focus. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say there that it's only by the grace of God that there aren't hordes of people converting to Islam in America, considering the sort of money that they're putting in.
Yep.
So it's not very effective, but it's at the same time it's worrying, and it means that an awful lot of particularly naive liberal Americans perhaps are not aware of the reality of Islam because of all this money. They're getting a very sanitized version of events, as it were.
So let's look here. Let's look at the top, I think, 13 universities, because the top 13 universities in America get the most money. Georgetown, George Washington, New York, University of California, Berkeley, Michigan, Columbia, even MIT gets money, right? University of California, Los Angeles, and so on. Let's have a look, for instance. The US taxpayer for Mideast studies, like Georgetown gets $484,000 from the US. George Washington gets $258,000 from the government. However, the Saudis, that's nothing. It's peanuts.
Yeah.
That's why Oxford is suffering. That's why they need external funding, right?
Yeah.
But look at this. The Muslim nations, from 250,000, the Muslim nations gave $100,854,000 to George Washington. That is a huge amount of money. And notice, Israel funded to George Washington University $507,000. The Muslims put in 201 times more.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, but the Jews have all the money. Sorry?
That's a lot of clout.
Yeah, but everyone knows the Jews have all the money somehow. Okay, which is, there's no evidence for that. You should also mention the percentage amongst the total funding. I've no idea what the total funding is, but we're looking at the Muslim nations. So the Chinese are also putting in an equivalent. I mean, the Chinese are also going ape in the universities. So, for instance, 377,864,000 to Georgetown, 81 million to New York University, and with negligible amounts. Look, you guys can go through this, the Title VI grants. This is 2019 to 2021, Department of Education, right? There's a cutoff date, so not everything makes it in, yeah?
Like, good luck if you're trying to do historical critique of Islam when that's the financial situation. You can forget about it. There's no way you're going to be able to do it.
Yeah. So think about it. You got 101 million over a 2-year period, and then you start doing, hey, let's look at the Sharia today, and like suddenly, boom, 100 million disappears. Remember, they're working as a block within the OIC. They're working as a block.
Yeah.
Right. So they're working as a unit. So let's look at this. Islamic Lobby University Dawah spend. So this is up to 1.4 billion. Let's have a look. Kuwait, Kazakhstan, Iraq. Right? UAE, Saudi Arabia, and then Qatar's double Saudi spend, and this is Israel down here. But you've got to put all of these guys together. So in this case, you're looking at 50 times more money from
Yeah.
from these guys. And this is a very interesting article, Moral Hazard, The New Republic, The Life of a Liberal Muslim. I'll just do a brief cover
Yeah.
of that. Here, so I'm just going to quickly go through, not all of this, just very little of it. So he's a liberal Muslim, and this is a 2002 article. So this shows how far back the problem goes. Death threats began shortly after September 11, 2001. Right? And it says that the callers weren't angry white men accusing him of terrorist sympathies. They were fellow Muslims accusing him of selling out the faith, but Muslim Americans accusing him of selling out the faith. I'm going to skip over a lot. I just want to get to a couple of major points because it's a fairly long article, but it's well worth reading and it's chilling. It makes me nervous to read this. Over the course of the next 4 decades after they found oil, the Saudis steadily purchased the ideological direction of Al-Azhar University. It started subtly with cushy Gulf sabbaticals for scholars. In 6 months on sabbatical, they would earn 20 years' salary. Right? So they started in Arabia itself. They took over Egypt, Al-Azhar, and they took over other institutions. So these guys would make $40 a month. So they would go for 6 months, come back with tens of thousands of dollars, and they set.
Let's call it what it is. These are massive bribes.
These are bribes. Yep.
Yeah.
So what happens is, for years, one of his most beloved teachers, Muhammad Jalal Kishk, had mocked the ignorance of Wahhabi Islam. But in 1981, he received a $200,000 King Faisal Award and the $850,000 King Fahd Award from the Saudi government. He then published a pro-Wahhabist book called The Saudis and the Islamic Solution. You make $1 million, you suddenly become pro-Islam.
Yeah. Wow.
So they go, look, the guy was kidnapped. He went on a speaking tour. Yeah. He was kidnapped. He was tortured. He was thrown into a prison for 6 weeks. The US government was able to get him back. Fortunately, his family kicked up a fuss. Scholars kicked up a fuss, and they got him back, and they nearly kidnapped him a second time. So Abu al-Fadl was suspended from the ceiling by his left arm for 6-hour intervals. God shocked him with electricity and pulled out his fingernails. After 3 weeks and without a conviction, they released him just because he was critical of Islam, because he was giving a counter-narrative as a scholar. Okay?
Yeah.
So he was kidnapped in Egypt, I believe it was. Then, while teaching at the University of Texas, Texas of all places, okay, he was kindly invited by a man into the building's boardroom. Entering, he found 15 men sitting around a table. They condemned his scholarship, and they called him the Great Satan. So the threat started, right?
Yeah.
He got emails. His wife was threatened, and so on, and blah, blah. There was all sorts of issues, and there's no better way to gauge the Saudi effort than by reading off the names of prominent Middle Eastern studies departments and the gifts they received from the Saudi royal family. 5 years ago, King Fahd gave Oxford University more than $30 million to its Islamic Studies Center. In 1994, the University of Arkansas received a $20 million grant to begin the King Fahd program for Middle Eastern Studies. A $5 million gift to UC Berkeley now houses the Sultan bin Abdul Aziz program in Arab Studies. And even Harvard has a chair currently occupied by legal scholar Frank Vogel, called the custodian of the 2 holy mosques, adjunct professor of Islamic legal studies, subsidized by $5 million. That's a nice salary. That's a really nice salary every year. That's a little bit of a cushy life, going to nice hotels for conferences, writing books. And he says that since a graduate student at Princeton, the Saudis have plied him with similar offers of wealth. Before he'd even finished his PhD, the Muslim World League offered him $100,000 to write a book on Islam. However, it demanded final editorial control. He rejected the offer. The Saudis offered to nominate him for the $200,000 King Faisal Award. After a phone call, he stopped returning the Saudis' messages. They made him uncomfortable with too many leading questions about the enemies of Islam. But the Saudis kept trying. Lastly, they offered him and his guests an all-expense-paid VIP trip to Mecca for Hajj. And the final section, he'd seen what Saudi patronage has done to the scholarship of his colleagues. He calls Vogel's book on Saudi law, Islamic law and legal system, Studies of Saudi Arabia, an embarrassment. I've actually looked at some of it. I was not impressed. Vogel says he has no qualms about accepting Saudi money. I saw it as something very much in the greater good of the Muslim world, and particularly of Saudi Arabia, he told NPR in 1993. So this goes back 30 years.
Yeah.
The Saudi contributions had exacerbated the shift in Middle Eastern studies away from critical secular analyses of modernization towards celebration of Islamist civil society. So that's what I encountered at university. The Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Martin Kramer puts it, the last place to look for anything critical of Berkeley and Harvard. There's nothing out there in opposition trends in Saudi Arabia, because even if you're not getting money, you are trying to get the money. So the Saudis have even banned some of the works of their most important Hadith jurist, the 13th century Syrian Ibn Taymiyyah. Not that they don't believe him, they just don't want the stuff in public. Understand? They're trying to keep it quiet. They're trying to keep it low. So if you read the article, there's lots of interesting stuff there that is worth considering. I'll just quickly go back to this. So the combined Islamic Dawah spend versus Israel, this is Israel here, 53 million versus 2.517 billion. That's 47 times more money.
Yeah.
Right? And again, we're going to biotech and science for farming, mostly farming, and 2.5 billion to making textbooks and teaching Dawah in schools, universities, and even kindergarten. Kindergarten. So I'll end off here. They couldn't change your mind, so they went after your children.
Yeah.
This is a very detailed presentation, understand? Because there's a lot of pages. I just went through 7 pages that focus on universities. This goes through Islamic lobbying, and there's trillions of dollars going into the US.
This is just the tip of the iceberg, because we're just focusing on the academic side, but we could talk about the lobbying towards government, and there's probably money going into the news agencies across America as well. I'm sure they get a lot of money as well. But
so that was my bit there. But hopefully, I mean, that showed some hard numbers, and you can download those figures yourself. You can go to the websites and download them and check. They should be updated by now.
Well, the context of this was that someone who has watched my channel's videos have said, we should trust the history of Islam. There's a consensus, essentially. But my point is, you can't, in normal circumstances with history, you can generally trust the consensus, but not in this context where you have loads of money squilling around to protect a particular view. It's not it's not a free-for-all. There's no academic freedom here in any of this. And we are the lonely few who are challenging the consensus.
Yeah. And also, how much of this, look, we know that there's more money than this. There are ways to get around the reporting standards, and we know it's being done. It's well known. The FBI has gone after universities. But look, the FBI themselves have their own internal issues. They're corrupt themselves. I think we all know that. But this is probably only half of what we know. There's probably at least double that money. How much of that money goes to religious departments, Christian studies, to promote atheism or Jesus mythicism? How much of that money goes to Bart Ehrman?
Oh, yeah.
Ask yourself. I mean, how much of that money goes to Elaine Pagels? I mean, who can use a little bit of help, I think.
Yeah, and this is only the officially the money that's officially announced. I'm sure there's lots of brown paper bags of money as well, extra payments.
And if you keep the money under a certain amount, like notice, there were there's like 16,000 of these donations. You see, because if you have one donation and it's $50, you don't have to report it. If it was, let's say, $1,000, you have to. But if you make 10 donations of $50 and another 5 donations of $100, don't have to report it because it's under the amount. You see? So then so they just make loads of tiny donations. And as long as one donor keeps it below $250 a year or something, then they don't report it. So there's literally millions of dollars that doesn't get reported at all.
That's crazy. So I'm sure that the audience may have comments or questions. So if I haven't been following the chat too much, obviously been following what you've been saying. So if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, but look, say one thing. So someone asked, what's the point of putting the money in? The short version, they're putting the money largely into political studies students. Okay, you're talking future diplomats. You're looking at future political journalists. Okay, they're very targeted. So people who are doing political journalism who are going to write about the Middle East, they are buying them over to write cushy little sweet stories about the Middle Eastern countries and Islam and to write nice things about the Taliban. They're also paying religious studies for Islam to write literally textbooks for school. Literally, this money is funding people writing textbooks for schools, and these textbooks are in American schools, British schools, Swedish schools, French schools.
Like,
They are writing friendly little false narratives. So they're going after future politicians, future journalists, and educators.
yeah,
This is and religious, and also they're buying priests and
yeah,
to
that's,
theologians. They're buying theologians, educators, journalists,
yeah.
and politicians.
You can imagine. I can just imagine what are in some of the academic books for schools now. Muhammad the feminist, you know, a real friend to women,
Mm-hmm.
or Muhammad the environmentalist who really looks after the water, and this is whatever it takes to be accepted within the society. They'll twist and turn things, to
Yeah,
suit their agenda. You know,
yeah. I mean, so how do you compete? You look at the end of the day. Here's to give maybe a little message of hope here.
yeah,
When a country decides to use political propaganda means to suppress an idea that whose time has come, they've always failed, because once an idea has made its way into the mind of the population, like you look at the fall of Russia, the fall of communism, we'll talk
yeah,
about that more at another time, but when the idea arrives, that idea cannot be eradicated, and no government program can suppress it forever. No government program. You'll simply make it spring up. You will. I mean, by trying to suppress it, you will make it express itself.
yeah,
So we have to win with information. We have to plant the seed of that idea,
yeah,
and all of us can. We might not have $2.9 billion, but you have a voice. You have facts,
yeah,
and eventually the idea will win, and it will destroy them.
yeah, yeah. I think the great thing about the internet is it's a great equalizer. All you need is a webcam, and some access to books and so forth, and that's all you need to kind of challenge the narrative. Lloyd, this has been fascinating. I'm sure there's a lot there for everyone. Feel free, everyone, to take screenshots and to share the information, share this video. I think this will be one of those videos that will be good to go back to whenever you're maybe having discussion with Muslims about academic freedom in the universities. I'm sure there will be a lot of denial about all of this, and there are probably a lot of Western liberals who probably don't see this. They think that it's a level playing field for everyone, but it's not. And yeah, I think
Yeah.
this is going
Yeah.
to help quite a bit.
Still, how much bogus research is coming out of these Islamic studies departments?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of schools are still teaching the general story of Muhammad, and how Khadija and that whole shebang, as if it is absolutely factually correct. Um, but I'm hopeful that I'm actually looking forward to the day when actually, whenever the story of Muhammad is told in schools, there'll be a little asterisk next to it, allegedly. At least that, if they have that word in, a little
Yeah.
doubt about the story. But
Mm.
so
Yeah.
that's it.
Look, also you can do indirect funding. Like, I mean, this is just I'm just going to put out a theory, but let's say Bart Ehrman, he doesn't say. Remember, he said publicly he will not say anything critical of Islam because he values his life,
Yeah,
right? Now they know. Let's say they say, look, Bart, we won't give you money directly. Tell you what, write a book. We will make sure that 100,000 people buy
yeah,
copies.
yeah, yeah,
They don't have to give him money. They just 100,000 people buy his book.
yeah. That's it.
You could do things like that. So there's
Yeah,
ways and there's means to give people money.
yeah. I'm pretty certain that he has probably sold a lot more books since he's left Christianity than he did before. Because of that angle. You know.
Yeah.
So I think we'll call it a day. We've done pretty well. We're just over the hour, I think, and we've
Yep.
covered a lot of ground. We're not going to do a 5-hour stream.
Would never
So
think of it.
no. So thanks a million, everyone, for coming along today, and we'll see you all very soon. And if there's any topics that you would like us to cover on future live streams, leave a comment down below, and hopefully we can address
Yeah.
those.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Mel.
Cheers. Thank